The ER doors slid open and he stumbled in alone, a crimson stain spreading across his white cashmere coat before he collapsed against the triage desk. The nurse grabbed his phone from his trembling hand. The emergency contact didn't say husband. It said Dante. Within 10 minutes, the city's most feared syndicate boss tore through the hospital doors. The storm over Chicago that night was unforgiving, sheets of rain hammering against the reinforced glass of St. Jude's Medical Center. Inside the emergency department, it was a quiet Tuesday until 11:42 p.m. The automatic sliding doors stuttered open, letting in a gust of freezing wind and a man who looked like he was already half ghost. Elias Whitmore was barefoot. His designer trench coat was soaked through, but the rain wasn't what had turned the fabric dark. It was blood. He had one arm wrapped protectively around his swollen pregnant belly and the other blindly reaching out for the triage desk. "Help," he whispered. The word barely had enough breath behind it to carry, but the raw desperation in his voice stopped triage nurse Sarah Jenkins dead in her tracks. Sarah bolted from around the desk just as Elias's knees gave out. She caught his shoulders before his head could strike the linoleum, his body terrifyingly light in her arms. A wave of distressed omega pheromones hit her, sweet undertones of night-blooming jasmine curdled with pain and terror, so strong it made her own alpha instincts twitch with protective alarm. "I need a gurney. Trauma 1, now!" Sarah screamed. The ER erupted into organized chaos. Dr. Harrison Boyd, the attending trauma surgeon, rushed out of curtain 3. They heaved Elias onto the gurney, the wheels squeaking violently against the wet floor. His skin was the color of ash, his lips tinged blue. Pulse is thready, heart rate 140. BP is 80/50 and dropping, Sarah rattled off, strapping a blood pressure cuff to Elias's limp arm. "He's hemorrhaging. Let's get 2 large-bore IVs in him, push fluids, and call the blood bank for O-negative, Dr. Boyd commanded, snapping on his gloves as they wheeled him under the harsh surgical lights of Trauma 1. The true extent of the damage became visible. This wasn't a car accident. The bruising on his face, a swollen jaw, a laceration above his brow, was the distinct, brutal artwork of closed fists. And beneath the blood-soaked coat, the imprint of boot heels was visible across his ribs. While the medical team fought to stabilize Elias and monitor the fetal heartbeat, an administrative nurse named Brenda stood by the discarded trench coat, rifling through the blood-stained leather messenger bag to find an ID and an emergency contact. She pulled out a pristine Illinois driver's license. Elias Whitmore. The name rang a bell, a loud one. He was the husband of Councilman Marcus Whitmore, the city's golden boy politician, heir to a political dynasty, and a prominent alpha whose public image was built on family values and anti-crime legislation. "Oh God," Brenda muttered. She immediately reached for Elias's phone to call the councilman, but the screen was shattered, dead from water damage. Digging deeper into a hidden zipper pocket of the bag, Brenda's fingers brushed against heavy, expensive cardstock. She pulled out a matte black business card. It had no company logo, no title, just a single first name embossed in silver foil and a private cell phone number beneath it. Dante. Flipping the card over, Brenda saw a handwritten note in sharp, masculine scrawl, "If you ever need me. No matter what." Assuming it was a private security contractor, or perhaps a brother, Brenda hurried to the front desk and dialed the number. It rang only once. "Speak." A voice answered. The single word was terrifyingly quiet, laced with an authority that made the hair on the back of Brenda's neck stand up. Even through the phone, she could sense the overwhelming presence of a powerful alpha, something primal and dangerous that made her own beta instincts urge her to submit. "Hello, is this Dante?" Brenda stammered, intimidated by the sheer gravity of the voice. "I'm calling from St. Jude's Medical Center. We have an Elias Whitmore here. He was just brought into the trauma bay. He's in critical condition, and your card was. I will be there in 8 minutes. "Sir, wait, you should know his husband." The line went dead. 9 minutes later, the atmosphere in St. Jude shifted entirely. The wail of ambulance sirens outside was drowned out by the screeching tires of 3 black Cadillac Escalades jumping the curb and parking directly in the ambulance bay. Richard Blaine, the night shift hospital administrator, had just come down to handle the PR nightmare of a councilman's husband being assaulted. But when the ER doors blew open, Richard physically took a step back. 6 men in tailored dark suits entered first, fanning out with military precision. They didn't draw weapons, but the heavy bulges under their jackets made it clear they didn't need to. They effectively locked down the lobby, turning away incoming walk-ins and blocking the exits. Then Dante Curvino walked in. He was the head of the Curvino Syndicate, a man who controlled the city's ports, its underground casinos, and half its politicians. He was a phantom to the press but a very real, very lethal reality to the Chicago underworld. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes as black and cold as obsidian. His alpha presence was suffocating, a rolling wave of dark amber and gunpowder that made betas in the vicinity instinctively lower their gazes and alphas step back. He wasn't projecting dominance intentionally, it was simply the gravity of his existence, the sheer weight of a predator who had never once been challenged and survived. Dante didn't look like a man who had rushed. He looked like a man who was about to burn the building to its foundations. "Where is he?" Dante's voice was a low vibrating rumble that commanded immediate obedience. Richard Blaine scrambled forward, his clipboard shaking. "Mr. Curvino, sir, we weren't expecting you. You aren't family." Dante closed the distance between them in 2 strides, grabbing Richard by the lapels of his coat and lifting him an inch off the ground. The Mafia boss's composure was perfectly intact, but his eyes betrayed a terrifying, violent panic. The amber scent around him sharpened, turning acrid with barely restrained rage. "I am the only family he has tonight," Dante said softly. "Now! Take me to him. Or I'll have my men dismantle this hospital brick by brick to find him myself." The waiting room of the surgical wing was completely isolated. Dante's right-hand man, Leo Costello, had politely but firmly cleared the floor of all other civilians. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and the expensive dark cedar cologne of the syndicate men standing guard at every corridor. Dante sat rigidly on a plastic waiting room chair, his hands clasped so tightly together his knuckles were bone white. There was a smear of Elias's blood on his left cuff, transferred when a nurse had brushed past him carrying Elias's clothes in an evidence bag. He stared at the crimson stain, the beast inside him rattling against its cage. How had it come to this? The city thought Elias Whitmore lived a charmed life, married to Marcus Whitmore, the golden boy councilman, heir to a political throne. Elias was the picture of philanthropic grace, a beloved Omega who hosted charity galas and visited children's hospitals. But Dante knew the truth. He had known since the night 8 months ago when he found Elias shivering in an alleyway behind a charity gala. Marcus had left him there after backhanding him across the face for embarrassing him in front of the mayor. Dante, whose syndicate was actively being targeted by Marcus's anti-crime task force, had stepped out of the shadows and offered Elias his handkerchief. He should have used Elias as leverage. He should have taken photos to destroy the councilman's pristine reputation. Instead, he had looked into those tear-filled, defiant green eyes and felt something inside his chest lock into place, a fierce, predatory protectiveness that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with the Omega's scent. Night-blooming jasmine, bruised and desperate, had wrapped around Dante's senses and refused to let go. Over the next few months, their paths crossed in secret. Whispered conversations in library alcoves. Burner phones. Elias became his quiet sanctuary. Dante became his only shield against Marcus's escalating alcohol-fueled rages. Dante had begged Elias to let him kill Marcus, he could make the councilman disappear without a trace. But Elias, terrified of the political fallout and the danger it would put Dante in, had refused. Then Elias got pregnant. Dante closed his eyes, his jaw clenching so hard it ached. He remembered the day Elias told him. Marcus had been infertile for years, a closely guarded secret. The baby wasn't the councilman's. It was the Mafia boss's. The pregnancy had changed everything. Elias's scent had deepened, blooming into something richer, more intoxicating. The bond between them had grown stronger, though they'd never completed the mating mark. Dante had wanted to wait until Elias was free, until they could do it properly, in safety, with the full weight of Dante's protection around him. Now Elias was bleeding in an operating room, and Dante had never felt more powerless. "Boss," Leo said quietly, breaking Dante from his dark reverie. Leo approached, a sleek tablet in his hand. "I pulled the street cameras near the councilman's townhouse. It wasn't a random mugging." Dante stood up slowly. "Show me." Leo played the footage. It was grainy, shot through the rain, but clear enough. An unmarked van pulled up to the back gate of the Whitmore estate. 2 men stepped out. They weren't wearing masks. They were known enforcers for the Irish mob, the O'Connors, Dante's bitterest rivals. But what made Dante's blood run ice cold was what happened next. The back door of the townhouse opened. Marcus Whitmore stood there, wearing a silk robe. He spoke to the enforcers, stepped aside, and let them into his home. 5 minutes later, the enforcers dragged a struggling, bleeding Elias out the back door. He fought like a wildcat, breaking free and running into the dark rainy streets while the men, perhaps spooked by an approaching siren, retreated to their van. "Marcus has been burying gambling debts," Leo explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Millions of dollars owed to the O'Connors. The councilman's office was about to seize the O'Connor shipping containers. Marcus made a trade. He gave them Elias in exchange for wiping his debt and saving his own skin." A suffocating silence descended on the waiting room. Dante didn't shout. He didn't break anything. The reaction was far worse. The humanity completely drained from his face, leaving behind the cold, calculating apex predator that ruled the city's underworld. "Leo," Dante's voice was a whisper that carried the weight of a death sentence. "Yes, boss." "Find Marcus Whitmore. Do not kill him. Bring him to the meatpacking facility on the south side. I want him breathing when I get there." "And the O'Connors?" Dante turned to look out the window at the rain-soaked city. "Tonight, we wiped them from the map. Every lieutenant, every capo, every soldier. I want the streets running red by dawn." Before Leo could nod, the heavy double doors of the surgical wing swung open. Dr. Boyd walked out, his scrubs stained, his surgical mask pulled down to his chin. He looked exhausted. Dante was in front of him before the doctor could take a full breath. "Is he alive?" Dr. Boyd swallowed hard, intimidated by the sheer imposing force of the man and the overwhelming wave of protective alpha pheromones that rolled off him. "He's alive. We managed to stabilize the internal bleeding. He suffered severe blunt force trauma leading to a partial placental abruption. It was incredibly close. If he had arrived 5 minutes later, he would have bled to death." Dante felt the floor tilt beneath him, the relief hitting him harder than a physical blow. His amber scent, which had been sharp with rage, softened momentarily with overwhelming gratitude. "The baby?" Dante's voice cracked. "The fetal heartbeat dropped, but it has stabilized," Dr. Boyd said gently. "He's a fighter, Mr. Curvino. But Elias is heavily sedated. He won't wake for a few hours. I want him moved to a private floor now. No nurses or doctors enter that room without my men vetting them first. And his name is wiped from the hospital registry. As far as the world is concerned, Elias Whitmore did not come here tonight. Dr. Boyd nodded quickly. Of course. I'll make the arrangements. As the doctor scurried away, Dante turned to the hallway window, looking out at the sprawling rain-soaked skyline of the city. He had spent his life building an empire of shadows, believing he was incapable of bringing anything but destruction into the world. But Elias had changed the rules. He was carrying Dante's light, his legacy, and he had nearly paid for it with his life because of a coward's debt. Marcus Whitmore thought he could trade his Omega to save his own skin. The O'Connors thought they could lay hands on what belonged to Dante Corvino and live to see tomorrow. They were both about to learn that there are fates far worse than death. The Mafia boss adjusted his cuffs, the dried blood on the fabric a stark reminder of the promise he had made Elias. If you ever need me. No matter what. Dante turned his back to the window, his eyes flat and dead. Leo, he commanded into the silence of the hospital corridor. Let's go to work. The South Side meatpacking facility was a cavernous tomb of stainless steel and frost. The air inside the main processing floor was kept at a biting 36 degrees, smelling faintly of bleach, old copper, and the undeniable chill of the grave. The Golden Boy councilman of Chicago was shivering violently. He was strapped to a heavy steel chair bolted to the concrete floor, still wearing his monogrammed silk robe, though it was now soaked with freezing water. His pristine image, the impeccably groomed hair, the confident political sneer, had completely dissolved. He was hyperventilating, his eyes darting wildly around the dim cavernous room, trying to make out the shapes of the men standing in the shadows. Marcus Whitmore was a powerful alpha, or at least he had been. His pheromones, usually a commanding blend of expensive cologne and authority, were now sour with terror, curdled with the unmistakable stench of a predator who had suddenly realized he was prey. He had expected the Irish. He had expected Declan O'Connor's thugs to come back for him, demanding more money or complaining that the job went south. But when the heavy metal doors ground open, the man who stepped into the dim overhead light was not Declan O'Connor. It was Dante Corvino. Marcus's breath hitched in his throat. His political career had been built on promising to dismantle the Corvino syndicate. He knew the face of the man standing before him. But seeing him in the flesh, radiating a lethal, suffocating calm, was entirely different from staring at a mugshot on a task force bulletin board. Dante walked slowly, his heavy Italian leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the concrete. He stopped 5 feet from Marcus. He didn't carry a weapon. He didn't need to. The sheer gravity of his presence made the freezing room feel impossibly small. And his scent, dark amber and gunpowder, laced with cold fury, filled the space like smoke, choking the air out of the room. Corvino, Marcus gasped, trying to summon a shred of his courtroom bravado. What is the meaning of this? You're kidnapping a sitting councilman. The FBI will tear this city apart looking for me. Whatever the O'Connors promised you, I can double it. I have immunity deals, I can. Quiet. It wasn't a shout. It was a murmur. But it hit Marcus like a physical blow. The councilman snapped his mouth shut. Leo Costello stepped out of the shadows, holding a sleek black briefcase. He set it on a stainless steel table and clicked the latches open. I don't care about your deals, Marcus. Dante spoke, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. And I don't care about the O'Connors. In fact, by the time the sun rises, the O'Connor syndicate will be nothing but a memory. My men are currently paying visits to Declan's shipping yards, his nightclubs, and his suburban estate. There will be no Irish mob left to collect your gambling debts. Marcus's eyes widened in terror. Then, why am I here? If you're wiping them out, you should be thanking me. I gave them a distraction tonight. Dante's jaw tightened. The faint flicker of a monstrous rage danced in his obsidian eyes. He leaned down, placing both hands on the armrests of Marcus's chair, bringing his face inches from the councilman's. The amber scent intensified, threatening, suffocating. The distraction, Dante whispered, the ice in his voice cracking to reveal the inferno beneath, was Elias. Marcus froze. For a second, his politically trained mind couldn't connect the dots. The untouchable Mafia boss and his quiet, battered Omega husband. Then the realization crashed over him, draining the remaining color from his face. You, Marcus stammered, staring at Dante. Suddenly, a twisted, desperate laugh bubbled up from his chest. Oh God! It's you! The rumor! The late nights! You're the one! I knew the baby wasn't mine. I've been sterile for 5 years. I thought he was sleeping with some pathetic junior partner at the firm. I wasn't going to let him parade a bastard child around while I ran for the Senate. It would have ruined my campaign. Dante's hand shot out. His fingers wrapped around Marcus's throat, squeezing with calculated, agonizing pressure. The alpha's struggling made the room fill with his terrified pheromones, but Dante's scent was stronger, darker, drowning out everything else. Marcus gagged, his hands clawing uselessly at the zip ties binding his wrists. You traded him, Dante stated, watching the oxygen leave Marcus's face. You handed a pregnant Omega over to butchers to clear your ledger and save your political aspirations. Dante released him abruptly. Marcus slumped forward, coughing and gasping for the freezing air. I could kill you right now, Dante continued smoothly, stepping back and pulling a pristine white handkerchief from his pocket to wipe his hands. It would take less than a minute. We have incinerators in the back that burn at 2000 degrees. You would simply cease to exist. But death is a release, Marcus. And I do not intend to release you. Dante nodded to Leo. Leo stepped forward and pulled a stack of documents from the briefcase. He placed them on a clipboard and shoved them under Marcus's nose. What is this? Marcus wheezed. These are the wire transfers from your secret Cayman accounts, moving millions of dollars of embezzled campaign funds directly to the O'Connor syndicate, Leo explained flatly. And a drafted confession detailing how you, Councilman Marcus Whitmore, have been secretly orchestrating the Irish mob's narcotics trade, using your office to bury their rivals. I'm not signing that, Marcus spat, defiance momentarily overriding his fear. It's a lie. The feds will know it's a forgery. It won't be a forgery, Dante said, gesturing to the shadows. 2 enforcers stepped forward. One grabbed Marcus's right hand, forcefully uncurling his fingers, while the other held a heavy suppressed tactical pistol. We don't need your signature, Marcus. We just need your fingerprints. Dante explained coldly. Your prints are going on these documents. Your prints are going on the weapon that killed Declan O'Connor 30 minutes ago. Your encrypted phone, which we took from your townhouse, has been pinging off cell towers at every location where an O'Connor lieutenant was murdered tonight. Marcus shook his head wildly, the true horror of his situation finally taking root. No. No. You can't do this. I'm the councilman. I'm the victim here. They broke into my house. By tomorrow morning, Dante continued, his voice echoing like a judge delivering a final verdict, the FBI will find these documents in a safety deposit box registered in your name. They will find the murder weapons in the trunk of your car. You won't be remembered as a victim, Marcus. You will be remembered as the most corrupt, violent politician in Chicago history, a man who tried to take over a cartel and had his own Omega attacked to cover his tracks. The enforcers pressed Marcus's thumb heavily onto the ink pad, then onto the confession papers. They grabbed the pistol, wrapping his trembling fingers around the grip, ensuring his prints were perfectly transferred to the metal. You're going to federal prison, Marcus. Dante leaned in, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. Not a white-collar resort. A maximum security facility. And who do you think runs the cell blocks in those prisons? Marcus began to weep, a pathetic broken sound that echoed off the frozen steel walls. He realized with crushing certainty that Dante Corvino had just rewritten reality. My men will be waiting for you, Dante said, turning his back on the ruined politician. They will ensure you live a very, very long time. And every single day, you will remember the night you tried to throw my family to the wolves. Let's go, Leo. Dante commanded, walking toward the exit. I need to get back to the hospital. The morning sun over Chicago broke through the heavy gray storm clouds, casting a warm golden hue across the private VIP recovery wing of St. Jude's Medical Center. The entire floor was dead silent, save for the rhythmic, reassuring beep of the heart monitor in room 412. Elias Whitmore drifted up from the heavy depths of anesthesia. His body felt entirely foreign to him, a landscape of aching bruises, heavy limbs, and a dull throbbing pain in his abdomen. Panic, sharp and immediate, pierced through his drugged-out brain. He gasped, his eyes snapping open as his hands flew frantically to his stomach. He's safe. The voice was a low, steady anchor in the swirling chaos of his mind. Elias turned his head, wincing as the bruised muscles in his neck protested. Dante was sitting in a high-backed leather chair beside his bed. He looked immaculate. Gone was the blood-stained suit from the night before. He wore a crisp charcoal jacket and a white shirt. There wasn't a single speck of dirt or violence on him. But Elias knew him too well. He could see the faint shadows of exhaustion beneath his dark eyes, and the rigid, coiled tension in his broad shoulders that only appeared when he had just returned from a war. And his scent, Elias breathed it in, the dark amber and gunpowder that had become his sanctuary. It was tinged with something raw, something vulnerable beneath the iron control. Fear. Dante had been afraid. Dante leaned forward, gently taking Elias's trembling hand in his. His touch was incredibly warm, entirely contrary to the cold brutality he showed the rest of the world. The contact sent a shiver through Elias's bond marker, the place on his neck where the mating mark would one day go, still unclaimed but already aching for completion. The baby is safe, Elias. Dante repeated softly, his thumb tracing the back of Elias's knuckles. Dr. Boyd assured me the placental tear was minor. You're both going to be perfectly fine. Tears spilled over Elias's eyelashes, tracking down his pale, bruised cheeks. The memory of the rain, the rough hands of the Irish enforcers, and the terrifying realization of Marcus's betrayal flooded back. Marcus, he choked out, his voice raspy. He let them in, Dante. He stood there and watched them take me. I know. Dante said. There was no anger in his voice, only a chilling finality. Marcus is no longer a concern. Elias's breath hitched. Did you, Dante, if you killed a councilman, the federal government will never stop hunting you. You can't go to war with the FBI. Dante offered a faint, reassuring smile. He reached for the remote on the bedside table and clicked on the wall-mounted television, keeping the volume low. The local news channel was broadcasting live from the steps of the federal courthouse. The banner at the bottom of the screen read in bold red letters, Massacre in the Underworld, Councilman Marcus Whitmore arrested. Elias stared at the screen in disbelief. The news anchor's voice was breathless with excitement. Authorities are calling it the bloodiest night in Chicago's history. The O'Connor crime syndicate has been effectively dismantled in a series of coordinated citywide attacks. But the true shock came at dawn, when FBI agents arrested Councilman Marcus Whitmore. Sources confirmed that weapons tied directly to the murders of the O'Connor leadership were found in Whitmore's possession, along with a massive cache of offshore financial documents proving the councilman was not only laundering money for the mob but actively orchestrating a violent takeover. The broadcast showed footage of Marcus, still wearing his wet, ruined silk robe, being shoved into the back of an armored FBI vehicle. He looked hollowed out, screaming wildly at the cameras about Dante Corvino, though the reporters dismissed it as the frantic ramblings of a cornered, corrupt politician. Dante muted the television. Elias looked away from the screen, his green eyes locking onto Dante's. He understood immediately. The sheer scale. The meticulous planning. The absolute destruction of Marcus's life without a single drop of blood leading back to the Corvino family. It was terrifying. It was brilliant. And he had done it all for Elias. He's going away for the rest of his life, Dante said quietly, his dark eyes searching Elias's face, watching for any sign of fear or rejection. He had just showed him exactly what kind of monster he was capable of being. He will die in a federal prison, completely disgraced. He will never come near you or our child ever again. Elias didn't pull his hand away. Instead, he turned his palm upward, lacing his fingers tightly through Dante's. He had spent years trying to play the perfect political spouse, shrinking himself to fit into Marcus's respectable, abusive world. He had believed that the light was safe and the shadows were dangerous. But the light had almost killed him. The shadow had saved him. You started a war for me, Elias whispered, the reality of the night settling over him. I ended a war for you, Dante corrected gently. He stood up, leaning over the hospital bed to press a soft, reverent kiss to Elias's unbruised forehead. The contact sent a pulse of warmth through Elias's body, his omega instincts purring in satisfaction. Dante's scent wrapped around him, protective and possessive, promising safety. There is no more hiding, Elias. There are no more burner phones or stolen minutes in alleys. The O'Connors are gone. Marcus is buried. From this moment on, you are a ghost to your old life. Elias closed his eyes, feeling a profound exhausted peace wash over him for the first time in his adult life. What happens now? Now, you heal, Dante said, his voice a fierce, protective vow. And when you are ready to leave this room, you will not walk out as the victim of a broken politician. You will walk out as Elias Corvino. And this city will belong to you. Elias looked at the man who ruled the Chicago underworld, a man who commanded killers and manipulated empires, and saw only the father of his child. The man who had answered the phone when he had nothing left. Okay, he whispered, a fierce new strength sparking in his chest. Take me home, Dante. The sprawling Corvino estate in Lake Forest stood as a modern fortress of limestone and black iron, shielded from the prying eyes of the world by acres of ancient oaks. It had been exactly 14 months since the night Elias Whitmore was wheeled into St. Jude's Medical Center. In the eyes of the Chicago elite, the councilman's husband had quietly filed for divorce amidst the catastrophic scandal that sent Marcus Whitmore to a maximum security federal penitentiary. He had retreated into private life, entirely disappearing from the society pages. But within the hidden, heavily guarded walls of the underworld, Elias had not disappeared. He had ascended. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the estate's west wing, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Elias sat behind a massive mahogany desk in his private study. He wore a tailored emerald green silk shirt, his posture immaculate, a stark contrast to the broken man who had once shivered in the rain. His scent, night-blooming jasmine, no longer bruised and desperate but rich and content, blooming with the unmistakable warmth of a well-cared-for omega, filled the room. In the adjoining nursery, the faint, joyful babble of 10-month-old Matteo Corvino echoed through the open doorway. Elias wasn't just Dante's husband. He had become the architect of the syndicate's legitimate future. Dante controlled the streets, the docks, and the shadows. But Elias controlled the light. Using the meticulous attention to detail he had honed during his years navigating the treacherous waters of high society politics, he had taken over the Corvino family's money laundering operations, real estate acquisitions, and charitable fronts. He tapped a silver pen against a thick leather ledger, his green eyes narrowed. The numbers on the page in front of him were perfectly balanced. Too perfectly. The heavy oak doors of the study opened, and Leo Costello stepped inside, respectfully averting his gaze until Elias acknowledged him. Even after all these months, Leo, a powerful alpha in his own right, still deferred to Elias's position, recognizing the Omega's authority. "You asked to see me, Mr. Corvino?" "Yes, Leo." "Close the door." Elias's voice was smooth but laced with a commanding edge that he had entirely absorbed from his husband. "I've been reviewing the quarterly reports from the South Side construction developments. Specifically, the municipal contracts overseen by Victor Rossi." Leo's expression tightened imperceptibly. Victor was a high-ranking capo, a relic of the old regime who had served under Dante's father. He was notoriously brutal and openly disdainful of the fact that the boss had given his Omega husband the keys to the family's financial kingdom. "Is there an issue with the ledgers?" Leo asked cautiously. "On the surface, no. Victor's accountant is exceptionally talented." Elias replied, turning the ledger around and pointing a manicured finger at a specific column of expenses. "But I spent 5 years running Marcus's campaign finances. I know what a shell corporation looks like when it's bleeding out. Victor is over-reporting the cost of raw steel and funneling the excess margin into a private holding company in Delaware." Leo stepped forward, his eyes scanning the numbers. "How much?" $3 million over the last 2 quarters, Elias stated flatly. "But the theft isn't what concerns me. It's what he's doing with the capital." He pulled a secondary folder from his drawer and tossed it onto the desk. "I had our private investigators track the Delaware Holding Company. It's leasing warehouse space on the East Coast, space currently occupied by remnants of the Greek syndicate. Victor isn't just stealing, Leo. He's funding a rival faction to challenge Dante's monopoly on the shipping lanes." Silence hung heavy in the opulent study. Treason within the family was a death sentence. Elias's jasmine scent remained perfectly steady, but underneath it, a thread of cold steel emerged, the unmistakable resolve of an Omega who had learned to fight. "I will inform the boss immediately," Leo said, his hand instinctively dropping toward the concealed weapon at his waist. "Victor won't see tomorrow." "No." Leo froze. Elias's voice was firm, absolute. "Dante is in negotiations with the unions downtown. I will not have him distracted by a rat in his own house. Bring Victor here to my office in 1 hour." Leo hesitated, a flicker of genuine concern crossing his stoic face. "With respect, Mr. Corvino. Victor is a dangerous man. When he realizes he's been caught, he will not react reasonably. The boss would want to handle this." Elias stood up. He walked around the desk, projecting an aura of absolute, unyielding calm. His Omega pheromones shifted subtly, not in fear, but in challenge. The message was clear: he was not prey. "The men in this family need to understand that Dante and I are not separate entities, Leo. If they test me, they are testing him. And if I constantly hide behind my husband, they will always view me as a vulnerability." He met Leo's gaze squarely. "Bring him to me." "Understood." Leo nodded, leaving the room. An hour later, Victor Rossi swaggered into the study. He was a barrel-chested man with a thick neck and cold, arrogant eyes. He didn't wait for an invitation to sit, he immediately dropped his heavy frame into the leather chair opposite the desk, crossing his arms. His alpha pheromones filled the room aggressively, the cloying scent of cigar smoke and cheap whiskey, a deliberate challenge. "You wanted to see me, Elias?" Victor asked, intentionally omitting his title. "Make it quick. The legitimate side of the business might be 9 to 5, but the real world doesn't stop." Elias didn't flinch at the disrespect. He simply slid the folder across the mahogany surface. "I wanted to discuss your retirement, Victor," Elias said casually, leaning back in his chair. Victor frowned, picking up the folder. As he flipped through the pages, the bank statements, the surveillance photos of his Delaware warehouses, the shipping manifests, the arrogant sneer melted off his face, replaced by a dark, violent flush of panic. "Where did you get this?" Victor demanded, his voice dropping to a gravelly threat. "You've been spying on a capo? You stupid little Omega. You don't understand how this family works. Dante relies on me to keep the streets in line." "Dante relies on loyalty," Elias corrected softly. "You have been bleeding his legitimate operations to fund a war against him. You thought because I wear silk and rock a baby to sleep that I wouldn't notice $3 million missing from the concrete orders?" Victor slammed his hands on the desk, surging to his feet. The sheer size of the man was terrifying, a shadow of the violence Elias had suffered a year ago. But this time, Elias's heart rate didn't even spike. He didn't cower. His jasmine scent held steady, unwavering. "I bleed for this syndicate," Victor roared, leaning over the desk. "I'm not going to be lectured by a politician's leftover. I'll tell Dante these ledgers are forged. He'll believe his capo over an Omega who barely knows the rules of the street." "You won't tell Dante anything?" A voice rumbled from the shadows of the doorway. Victor froze, the color draining entirely from his face. Dante stepped into the room. He had returned early. He didn't look angry. He looked entirely hollowed out of mercy. His amber and gunpowder scent filled the study, dark and suffocating, drowning out Victor's weak posturing. He walked over to Elias's side of the desk, his presence an impenetrable wall of lethal authority. He placed a hand gently on Elias's shoulder, a silent testament to their unbreakable front. The touch sent a pulse of warmth through Elias's bond marker, and Dante's scent softened for just a moment. Acknowledgement, pride, love. "My husband found the rot in our foundation, Victor." Dante spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. "He tracked your betrayal. He gathered the evidence. And he summoned you. The only thing he left for me to do is take out the trash." Victor backed away, his hands raised in a desperate, trembling plea. "Boss, please. It's a misunderstanding. The Greeks approached me, I was just playing along to see what they wanted." Dante didn't even look at him. He looked down at Elias, an unspoken question in his dark eyes. He was offering Elias the final word. Elias looked at the man who had thought he was weak, who had thought he could fracture the empire they were building for their son. Strip him of his assets. Empty his accounts into the family trust. Ensure he never sets foot in Chicago again. Elias's voice was as cold as iron. He looked up at Dante. "Handle him." Dante smiled, a dark, terrifying expression that promised absolute ruin. He nodded to the doorway where Leo Costello and two enforcers had silently appeared. "You heard the consigliere," Dante commanded. "Take him downstairs." As Victor was dragged from the room, kicking and pleading, into the echo of the grand hallway, Dante turned his full attention to his husband. He reached down, brushing a stray lock of hair behind Elias's ear, his thumb tracing the flawless line of his jaw. "You handled that brilliantly," Dante murmured, his eyes blazing with a mixture of profound pride and dark adoration. His sense softened, the amber warming with something tender, intimate. "I knew you would." "I learned from the best," Elias replied, resting his hand over Dante's. His jasmine scent bloomed, wrapping around Dante's amber, intermingling in a way that was uniquely theirs. From the nursery next door, little Matteo let out a happy squeal. Dante and Elias turned toward the sound, the heavy darkness of their world entirely eclipsed by the light they had built within it. They were no longer just a mafia boss and a runaway Omega. They were an empire. A family. A bond forged in blood and fire and unshakable love. And God help anyone who tried to tear it down. Later that night, after Matteo had been fed and bathed and sung to sleep, Elias found Dante in the private library on the estate's top floor. The room was lined with ancient books and warm with the glow of a crackling fireplace. Dante stood by the window, looking out at the city lights in the distance. Elias crossed the room and pressed himself against Dante's back, wrapping his arms around the Alpha's broad chest. Dante's scent surrounded him, the familiar comfort of dark amber and gunpowder, but underneath it, something else. Something restless. "Are you all right?" Elias asked softly. Dante turned in his arms, pulling Elias close. His hands found Elias's waist, his thumbs stroking the curve of his hip. "I should be asking you that." "I'm fine," Elias said. And he meant it. Better than fine. Dante studied his face, his dark eyes searching. "When I got that call, when I saw you on that gurney." He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "I've never been that afraid. I've faced down federal agents, rival syndicates, assassination attempts, none of it compares to the moment I thought I might lose you." Elias reached up, cupping Dante's jaw. "You didn't lose me. You saved me." "I nearly lost you because I wasn't there," Dante said, the words rough with self-recrimination. "I should have put a mark on you the night I found you in that alley. Should have claimed you properly. Then no one would have dared." "Shoo." Elias pressed a finger to Dante's lips. "You know why I wanted to wait. I was still Marcus's husband. Legally, politically. I don't care about the law," Dante growled, his alpha instincts flaring. "I care about you. About our son. About making sure you're never vulnerable again." Elias smiled. "I'm not vulnerable now. I just proved that." Dante's growls softened into something almost like a laugh. "You did. You were magnificent. Victor didn't know what hit him. That's because Victor underestimated me. He saw an omega and assumed weakness." Elias's eyes hardened. "He won't make that mistake again." "No," Dante agreed. "He won't." They stood in silence for a moment, wrapped in each other's warmth. Elias's jasmine scent mingled with Dante's amber, creating something new, something that smelled like home. "I want to complete the bond," Elias said suddenly. Dante went still. "Elias. I've waited long enough," Elias continued, his voice steady. "I've healed. I've rebuilt myself. I've proven to everyone, including myself, that I'm not the broken victim I used to be. And I want to be yours. Completely. Fully. In every way that matters." Dante's eyes darkened, the amber in his scent flaring with raw possessive heat. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." Elias tilted his head, bearing the curve of his neck. The bond marker, still unclaimed, throbbed with anticipation. "Mark me, Dante. Make me yours." Dante's breath caught. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he leaned in, pressing his lips to the sensitive skin of Elias's throat. His tongue traced the spot where his teeth would sink in, tasting the sweet jasmine of Elias's scent, and Elias shivered. "This is forever," Dante murmured against his skin. "Once I do this, there's no going back." "I know," Elias whispered. "That's exactly what I want." Dante bit down. The pain was sharp and brief, overwhelmed immediately by a flood of warmth that spread through Elias's entire body. Dante's alpha pheromones poured into the bond, sealing the connection between them. Elias gasped, his fingers digging into Dante's shoulders as the bond locked into place, a permanent, unbreakable tether. When Dante pulled back, his eyes were fierce with possessive satisfaction. He licked the wound, his scent settling over Elias like a protective blanket. Mine, he said, the word of vow. Yours, Elias agreed, his voice thick with emotion. And you're mine. Dante smiled, not the cold, dangerous smile of the Mafia boss, but the warm, genuine smile that only Elias ever saw. Always. They kissed, slow and deep, the bond between them humming with contentment. Outside the window, the city glittered in the darkness, unaware that its underworld king had just found his reason to live. And in the nursery down the hall, little Matteo slept peacefully, dreaming of a future where his fathers, both of them, would always be there to protect him. The Corvino Empire continued to grow. Under Dante's iron fist, the streets ran orderly. Under Elias's careful management, the legitimate businesses flourished. The two of them were unstoppable, a partnership forged in fire, bound by blood, sealed with a mating mark. Those who had once whispered about the Mafia boss's Omega husband, calling him weak, calling him a liability, quickly learned to keep their mouths shut. Elias Corvino was no one's victim. He commanded respect not because of who he was married to, but because of who he had become. And when the next challenger inevitably rose, eyeing the Corvino throne, they would find two alphas, one born, one forged, and an Omega who had learned that true power came not from being protected, but from being able to protect yourself. The shadows had claimed Elias Whitmore. But Elias Corvino owned the shadows. Extra story: his name on my wrist. The first time Elias Corvino saw the name on his wrist, he was 17 years old and sitting in the back of his father's sedan, staring at the rain-streaked window of a Chicago he had never been allowed to explore. The mark had appeared overnight, a thin, elegant script in deep gold, as though someone had traced it onto his skin with liquid sunlight. Dante. He had no idea who Dante was. The name meant nothing to him. A stranger. A ghost. A future he couldn't yet imagine. At 17, Elias was already too tall for his age, too quiet, too careful. His mother called him difficult because he refused to smile for the cameras at his father's political fundraisers. His father called him disappointing because he preferred reading in his room to playing sports with the sons of donors. Elias had learned early that being an Omega meant being a decoration, a pretty piece of furniture to be displayed at the right events, married to the right alpha, and otherwise kept out of sight. But the mark on his wrist changed something. He traced the letters with his thumb in the darkness of his room, feeling the faint warmth that pulsed beneath his skin. The soulmate mark wasn't supposed to be warm. It was supposed to be a sign, nothing more, a name, a promise, a destiny waiting to be claimed. But this one felt alive. It hummed with a low, steady vibration, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to him. Elias pressed his wrist to his chest and closed his eyes. Who are you? The second time Elias saw the name, he was 23 years old and standing in the ballroom of the Drake Hotel, wearing a tuxedo that didn't quite fit and smiling at people he despised. He was engaged to Marcus Whitmore by then, a political match orchestrated by his father, a transaction disguised as a romance. Marcus had seen the mark on Elias's wrist during their first official meeting. The councilman's son had frowned, his alpha pheromones flaring with possessive irritation. Who's Dante? He'd demanded. I don't know, Elias had replied honestly. Marcus had sniffed, dismissive. Probably some nobody. Don't worry, Elias. I'll make sure he never comes near you. Elias had nodded, said nothing, and felt the mark burn against his skin like a warning. That night, standing alone on the balcony of the Drake, watching the Chicago skyline glitter like a million broken promises, Elias pressed his palm to his wrist and whispered into the cold air, Dante. Where are you? The mark pulsed once, warm and insistent. Not yet, it seemed to say. Soon. The third time Elias saw the name, he was lying in an alley behind a charity gala, his jaw swelling, his ribs aching, his blood dripping onto the wet pavement. Marcus had hit him, harder than usual, and left him there like garbage. The rain was cold, soaking through his tuxedo, and Elias couldn't stop shaking. He pressed his wrist to his lips and tasted the name there. Dante. Please, he whispered. I need you. A shadow fell over him. Elias looked up through the rain and saw a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes as black as the Chicago night. He was wearing an expensive dark suit, completely unbothered by the downpour, and his scent hit Elias like a freight train. Dark amber. Gunpowder. Something ancient and powerful and terrifyingly familiar. The man knelt down, his face impassive, and offered Elias a handkerchief. You're bleeding. Elias stared at him. The mark on his wrist was burning, not painfully, but insistently, like a voice shouting here, here, here. Dante, Elias breathed. The man's expression flickered. For just a moment, something raw and hungry passed across his features. Then it was gone, replaced by cool control. You know my name. Elias showed him his wrist. Dante's breath caught. His eyes dropped to the mark, the same elegant script, the same gold warmth, but on his own wrist, where Elias could now see it clearly for the first time. His sleeve had written up in the rain, revealing the name that had been there for years, waiting. Elias. I've been looking for you, Dante said, his voice rough with something that sounded almost like pain. For years. I didn't know where you were. I didn't know who you were. I just knew you were out there, and I had to find you. Elias laughed, a broken, desperate sound. I'm married. Or as good as. Marcus. I know who Marcus is, Dante interrupted, his eyes hardening. I know what he does to you. Elias's hand went to his bruised jaw, his split lip. Then you know why I can't. You can't stay with him. Dante's voice was absolute, a command wrapped in a plea. You can't go back to that house. Not now. Not ever. Elias shook his head, tears mixing with the rain on his cheeks. I have nowhere else to go. My father will never take me in. Marcus owns the house, the money, everything. I'm trapped. Dante reached out and took Elias's hand, the one with the soulmate mark. He pressed his lips to the golden letters, and Elias felt the warmth explode through his entire body, a shock of connection so powerful it stole his breath. You're not trapped, Dante said, looking up at him with those dark, devastating eyes. You have me. The fourth time Elias saw the name, he was wearing a hospital gown and holding Dante's hand in a sterile recovery room. The mark on his wrist had faded, not disappeared, but softened, as though the bond had already been set in motion, waiting only for the final seal. Dante leaned over him, his forehead pressed to Elias's, his scent wrapping around them both like a shield. I almost lost you. You didn't, Elias whispered. You found me. You always find me. That night, Dante told him the story of his mark. How it had appeared when he was 18, the same age Elias had been when his own mark bloomed. How he'd spent years searching, through nightclubs and charity galas, through political events and back-alley meetings, trying to find the name on his wrist. How he'd almost given up, convinced that his soulmate was dead or lost or simply didn't want to be found. Then he'd seen Elias at a fundraiser, standing next to Marcus with that hollow smile, and he'd known. He'd known the instant their eyes met across the crowded room that he'd found him. But Elias was married to a powerful alpha, a politician who'd made his career on destroying men like Dante. So Dante had stayed away. He'd watched from the shadows, biding his time, waiting for a moment when Elias would be free. And then he'd found him in that alley. I should have taken you then, Dante admitted, his voice hoarse. I should have walked into that gala and dragged you out by the hand. I was a coward. Elias reached up, his fingers tracing the hard line of Dante's jaw. You weren't a coward. You were waiting for me to be ready. Were you ready? Elias smiled, a real smile, the first one in years. I'm ready now. The fifth time Elias saw the name, it was tattooed on Dante's chest, just above his heart. Dante had gotten it done years ago, in the weeks after his mark first appeared, a permanent ink replica of the golden script on his wrist, placed over his heartbeat as a vow. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I'm coming for you. Elias traced the letters with his fingertips, his breath catching. You did this for me. Before you even knew me. I knew you existed, Dante said simply. That was enough. Elias pressed his lips to the tattoo, and Dante's scent flared, amber and gunpowder, sharp with sudden, desperate want. I'm yours, Elias murmured against his skin. I've always been yours. Then let me prove it, Dante growled, his hands finding Elias's hips, pulling him closer. Let me mark you properly. Let me make sure no one ever touches you again. Elias tilted his head, baring his throat. The bond marker, still unclaimed, still waiting, throbbed with anticipation. Mark me, he whispered. Make me yours forever. Dante's teeth sank into his skin. The pain was sharp and brief, eclipsed immediately by a flood of warmth that spread through Elias's entire body. Dante's pheromones poured into the bond, dark and possessive, sealing the connection between them with a final, irrevocable click. Elias gasped, his fingers digging into Dante's shoulders as the bond locked into place. When Dante pulled back, his eyes were fierce with triumph. Mine. Yours, Elias agreed. The mark on his wrist pulsed once, a final, golden heartbeat, and then settled into comfortable warmth. Found you, it seemed to say. Finally. The sixth time Elias saw the name, he was holding Matteo in his arms, showing his infant son the faded letters on his wrist. See that? Elias murmured, bouncing the baby gently. That's your father's name. He gave it to me a long time ago, before I even knew him. He just had to wait for me to catch up. Matteo gurgled, grabbing at Elias's wrist with chubby fingers. He couldn't read yet, couldn't possibly understand the significance of the golden script, but something in his tiny omega instincts recognized the name. He pressed his palm to it, just like Elias had done so many years ago, and cooed with contentment. Dante appeared in the doorway of the nursery, his expression softening at the sight. Telling him stories again. Someone has to explain how his fathers met, Elias replied, smiling up at him. It's not every day you get a soulmate mark and a mafia boss in the same package. Dante crossed the room, bending down to press a kiss to the top of Elias's head, then another to Matteo's forehead. He's going to think all love stories involve organized crime and hospital scares. Better that than politics, Elias said dryly. Dante laughed, a genuine laugh, the kind that only Elias ever heard. It was warm and rich and completely unlike the cold, calculating mafia boss the city knew. He knelt beside the rocking chair, resting his hand on Elias's knee, and looked at their son with an expression of such profound tenderness that Elias's heart ached. I never thought I'd have this, Dante admitted quietly. A family. A real one. Someone to come home to. I spent my whole life believing I was too broken for something like this. Elias reached out, threading his fingers through Dante's hair. You're not broken. You're just, complicated. A diplomatic way of saying I'm a monster. A monster who saved my life, Elias corrected. A monster who loved me when I was nothing. A monster who gave me a son and a home and a future. He leaned down, pressing his forehead to Dante's. If that's being a monster, then I'll take it. Dante's hand found Elias's wrist, his thumb stroking the faded golden letters. Do you ever wish you'd met me sooner? Before Marcus? Before all of it? Elias considered the question. In some ways, yes. In some ways, He wished he'd never known the weight of Marcus's fists, the coldness of his own father's approval, the loneliness of a life lived as a decoration rather than a person. But if he'd met Dante sooner, he wouldn't be the man he was now. He wouldn't have learned to fight. He wouldn't have learned to survive. He wouldn't have learned that power wasn't something given to you, it was something you took. No, Elias said finally. I think we met exactly when we were supposed to. Dante's eyes searched his face, looking for doubt. Finding none. Yeah, he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Yeah, Elias confirmed. The universe gave me your name when I was 17. It gave me the chance to find you. And when I was ready, when I finally stopped hiding, it gave me you. Dante kissed him then, slow and deep and full of promises. When he pulled back, his smile was the warmest thing Elias had ever seen. I love you, Dante said. Every version of you. The scared boy in the alley. The broken man on the gurney. The fierce Omega who runs half the empire I built. All of you. Forever. Elias pressed the mark on his wrist to Dante's chest, directly over the tattoo of his name. Forever, he agreed. Matteo cooed, reaching up to grab both his father's hands. His tiny fingers found the matching golden names, one on Elias's wrist, one on Dante's skin, and squeezed. Found you. The seventh time Elias saw the name, he was 34 years old, watching the sunrise over Lake Michigan from the balcony of the Corvino estate. The golden letters on his wrist had faded into something softer, more permanent, less like a promise and more like a memory. A testament to a journey that had begun in rain and ended in light. Dante came up behind him, wrapping his arms around Elias's waist, resting his chin on his shoulder. Thinking. Always. About what? Elias smiled, turning his wrist over to catch the early morning light. The name caught the sun, shimmering gold against his skin. About how I got here, he said. About how a name on my wrist led me to everything I ever wanted. Dante's arms tightened around him. Everything. Elias turned in his embrace, facing the man who had been his salvation, his partner, his equal. He pressed his wrist to Dante's chest, feeling the heartbeat beneath his palm. Everything, he confirmed. You, Matteo, this life. All of it. Dante kissed him, soft and sweet. I love you. I know, Elias murmured against his lips. The universe told me. A long time ago. The end.